I wasn't smart enough to look this up before I pressed record. So sticky wickets. I hope it means what I think it means. Because I'm kind of thinking that doing these little episodes on sticky wickets in these real estate deals would be interesting. But also, like I said, I hope it means what I think it means. So I'm going to tell you guys a story about a sticky wicket issue that we're going through on one of our transactions. Just because I think it's interesting both to buyers and sellers, and the general public, because y'all are nosy like I am. So if you haven't already, be sure to press follow or subscribe so that you can keep up to date with this kind of content if you like watching it. Also, there's going to be a link in the description or the caption or whatever that directs you to this full episode because I think a lot of you are going to end up seeing this on like Instagram or Facebook or TikTok, and it's definitely going to cut off because I know I have more than 3 minutes to tell this story. So here we go. We've got a seller under contract on his home, and when he bought the home, he was looking for a fixer upper, a project house. And so he bought a little house that needed a lot of love, and he went to work renovating pretty much the entire thing. It was like a little two-bedroom, one bath, and he renovated all of it. And he did a great job. It looks really pretty. When we put it back on market to sell it, the pictures are just really cute. He did a great job. So here's what's happening. We found a buyer, but the buyer and the buyer's team noticed that there was an electrical permit that got pulled that was expired. And so it caused them concern, and it has become a part of this transaction that my seller needs to take care of that electrical permit and make sure that it gets the final inspection happens and the permit shows as completed before this buyer will close on the house. So, the interesting thing about this is I don't know if you've heard me talk about permits before, but in my opinion, permits are kind of a racket. Like, I think that it's a revenue stream for, cities and counties and governments. And I know that the government thinks that they're doing it to protect the public, right? Like, they want to make sure that work was done properly, and they want to make sure that if a licensed electrician or a licensed plumber or a licensed roofer comes in and does work, they're wanting to oversee it and ensure that the work was done correctly. Now, part of the reason that I think it's kind of a racket is because I have heard things like, depending on where you are, like there might only be one or two inspectors for the entire area. And those inspectors may not, they might be like HOA board members. They may not have any skills or qualifications for the type of inspections that they're doing. They may have been appointed by a government official into that position. So, again, this is just stuff I've heard. I don't know, how accurate that all is, but that is why I have the opinion that I do that, permits are just not really a big deal. We inspect these houses and we have people, if we have questions about electrical or about plumbing, then we pull in a licensed electrician or a licensed plumber and we have them check out whatever it is. And we get their opinion because I go to them as the expert in that area, and I trust their opinion on, whether the work is done properly, if it's safe, if it needs updates. So that's what we're doing, if I'm on the buyer's side, that's what we're doing when we're inspecting a house. Um, I think that there are some myths associated with permits. For instance, I think that some people think that, if you haven't pulled permits and have completed permits for a house, that you can't sell it. And that's just not true. You can sell any house. The reason that we're having this issue on this deal is because the buyer has made it an issue, not because not because you can't sell it if the permit's expired, but because the buyer said, that's not okay with me. I want this permit completed. Oh, another thing about permits. Just because a permit was opened means nothing. So if you are checking permits for something, you want to see that the permit is completed or accepted or something like that. That means that the inspector has come out, done the final inspection, signed off on all of it, and closed the permit. So if there's an open permit or an expired permit, then that final inspection and final sign off did not happen. Um, so back to our deal. What had happened was the seller tore into this house to do all these renovations. And, all new bathroom, all new kitchen. He upgraded all of the electrical in the house. And so all of the wiring is new. Um, when he had the walls open, he had opened the permit, or sorry, his electrician that he hired for the electrical work opened the permit. Then, the inspector came out and did a rough inspection, meaning that they looked at all the electrical work that was done while the walls were open, so you could still see all the wiring and everything inside the walls. So that happened, and it passed the rough inspection. Then, then they couldn't come back and do the final inspection until the renovations were complete. Now, because my seller or my client was working on these renovations after work, I mean, he's got a day job. This was a project house. And so he was doing all these renovations kind of on nights and weekends, right? Probably mostly weekends. So by the time that he got done with the renovations, including the kitchen, that was the last thing to get done, and it had under cabinet lighting. And that was the last thing that needed to be done before they could come do a final inspection and close out that electrical permit. But that kitchen renovation, all of the renovations and the under cabinet lighting, which was one of the last things to happen, didn't happen until, it didn't all get done until it was more than a year later. And so now we find out that a permit is only open for 1 year and then it expires. So, who knew, right? That's why I'm telling you guys this stuff, all kinds of interesting information. Um, so the permit expired because it took him more than a year to get these renovations done and be ready for this final inspection. Now, by the time that he was ready for the final inspection, the electrician that he hired had moved up into the mountains and isn't even in Denver anymore. And so, he would follow up with that electrician and say, "Hey, let's get this closed out." And they would say, "Oh, yeah, we'll help with that. We'll get it done, but we're not in town anymore." And then it would be a little bit of phone tag and a little bit of, "Oh, we'll get back to you on that." And that kind of conversation happened about once a year for 6 years. And so then when we went under contract, the buyer found the expired permit. The buyer made it part of their inspection objections. They said, "We're not closing on this house until this permit situation is fixed." Well, now we really go to work, man. We not only is my seller back on the phone with the original electrician saying, "Hey, like I really need your help to get this permit closed because now I can't sell my house and, really need your help because it's opened under their license number." At the same time, we went with a two-pronged approach to try to solve this situation. I also called up one of my electricians and I said, "Can you please help with this? Like, can you open a permit and let them come and inspect it and then get the permit closed so that the buyer can be assured that all the work was done correctly?" Well, my electrician starts going, "Well, yeah, I'm willing to help, but that like the walls are already closed. If I open a new permit, then they will want to do a rough inspection and like then you have to open up the walls and nobody wants to do that." So now we're trying to figure out like first of all, we found proof of the rough inspection pass from years ago. And so we had that screenshot or that documentation that showed that somebody had come out when the walls were open and they had inspected it. They'd done the rough inspection and it was accepted or it had passed. So we said, "Can you use this? Can you give them proof that it passed the rough inspection and have them just come do the final inspection?" And, we still weren't sure if that was gonna work because it would be under a totally different license number, right? And we just didn't know if the city or the county or the state, in this case, it's the state. We didn't know if the department or the inspector would accept the rough pass from the previous permit that had expired. So, we're emailing the state and we're calling and we're on hold forever and we're waiting for an email back. And in the meantime, my seller is calling multiple times a day to the old electrician up in the mountains, like, hey man, I really need your help. Like, what can you do? And the owner, he finally tells him that he's not gonna leave him hanging. If he has to drive down from the mountains, he will. Well, he came up with an alternative solution, and that was, he did find an electrician that that he works with down here in Denver. And so, I don't know the particulars of whether this electrician, if they just know each other or if he actually does work for that company, but he did find a guy who could open what they called a trim permit. Now, don't I have not researched that. I don't know why it's called that or anything else, but I think it's like, it's a solution permit, right? It's like the old permit was expired, so now this is like a secondary permit. They call it a trim permit. So this one is opened under that same license number for the expired permit, and he was able to get the inspector on the schedule. So that's happening next week. Fingers crossed that goes well because, now we're hitting up close to closing, right? So, and we have had to move dates. The buyer didn't want to pull the trigger on paying for the appraisal until they were pretty sure that this whole permit thing was going to be fixed. So we've ended up pushing the appraisal dates. We might have to push closing. I'm still not sure if we'll be able to close on time. At this point, it kind of like assuming that the final inspection happens when it's scheduled and that it passes and that we get the appraisal in. Now it's kind of on the appraisal. We'll see how fast the lender can deal with the appraisal and if we're still able to close on time or not. I'm not sure. However, uh, boy, did I cover it all? I think. It was just such an interesting situation. I just found out a lot about permitting and the permit process that I didn't know. I told my electrician, thank you for the help. We think we've got it figured out with the original electrician. And now we're in communication with this guy here in Denver that's associated with the original electrician, and this appointment is scheduled for the spinal inspection. So, I think that everything is working out okay. It should be fine. But it was just a whole rigmarole, a whole sticky wicket. And these types of things, you never know what you're going to run into. And these types of things are the things that happen, that you really want somebody on your side helping you get through it and helping kind of figure it out and manage all the pieces, come up with solutions, maybe multiple solutions until we can, move through the issue and get to a solution. So, I think that's it for this story. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Like I said, be sure to hit subscribe or follow wherever you're seeing this video. If you like to see these kind of stories and this real estate content and you find it interesting, we'd love for you to subscribe. So that's it for me. I will see you next time.